What's up guys, my name's Stu. I am finally finishing up my updated Lobi store series, so let's get a look at the ground weapons over there. So this video is going to be a bit different than the previous two Lobi store videos that I did, because unlike last time, I'm not going to be going over each and every individual item in each section, because frankly that would take forever for the ground weapon section. There are several more items available in the ground gear section of the Lobi store than there are the space gear or the ship section, so that's one thing that's going to slow me down. And there are fewer sets available in the ground gear, so that means I'm going to have to go over more individual items instead of whole sets altogether. I've been trying to figure out how I'm going to do this video, and a few members in the community suggestion that I just go over the highlights of this section instead of going over each item. Just pick a few of the really standout items and just focus on those. So I'll be doing that, along with another section going over a few items that you probably want to avoid. So one of the reasons I'm going with this approach of just going with the highlights rather than going over every single weapon in here is because nearly every ground weapon available in this store is more than capable of getting you through pretty much any ground content in the game. So if there's something in here that you like because it has a unique firing mode or some sort of other unique ability, or if you think something just looks cool or if it fits the visual theme of one of your characters, then yeah, go for it. But while pretty much everything in the store is what I would consider to be above average for the rest of the game, there are still some things in this store that are better than others. So let's look at the first one on that list, the Portable Phaser Cannon Special Issue, or what the community commonly refers to as the Shaxx Cannon. We call it that because this weapon's first and only cannon appearance was in the Star Trek Lower Decks episode Crisis Point, where it was being wielded by Lieutenant Shaxx. Well, at least a hologram version of him. That, and because it's quicker than saying Portable Phaser Cannon Special Issue. This weapon is very powerful and has some mechanics that you're not going to find anywhere else. Its primary portable phaser cannon beam attack works a bit differently than other beam attack weapons on ground weapons. The beam will deal a certain amount of phaser damage initially, but will continue hitting your target for a full 1.05 seconds. For every 0.35 seconds the beam is active, it will deal some additional phaser damage. The secondary attack is called Portable Phaser Cannon Blast. This is potentially an extremely powerful attack because of the nature that its damage can be charged up. The attack itself is a cylinder of phaser damage that will hit up to 4 different targets. How it works is that you charge it up by just holding down the firing button. The longer you hold down the button, the more powerful the attack will be, maxing out at 3 seconds. But on top of that, all of the special issue phaser weapons available in the Lobi store, so that's all the lower decks weapons, have this special ammunition mechanic. Over time, your secondary attack will build up stacks of ammo. Each charge takes 12 seconds to recharge, and you can stack up to 3. Each charge of ammo that you have will grant an additional shot from your secondary attack. So if I have 3 stacks of ammo on this thing and I fire off that secondary attack, it will fire 3 times in a row. And additionally, the primary attack has a 5% chance to max out your ammo, so there's a small chance you'll be able to bypass the cooldown altogether. Now, that portable phaser cannon is definitely the most powerful of the 4, but that special ammo mechanic definitely makes the other 3 worth looking at least. Personally, I'm rather fond of the split beam rifle special issue. Its attacks are the same as any normal split beam rifle, but the ammo mechanic means you're going to get a lot more use out of the auto-targeting beam attack, making this weapon really nice for clearing out mobs of weaker enemies in my opinion. Honestly, I'd love for them to release more of these special issue lower decks weapons. We still don't have a lower decks version of the Type 2 phaser, and I would love to have a wide beam pistol with that ammo mechanic. Okay, next up on the list is the Discovery Phaser Full Auto Rifle. Now, at first glance, this might look like any ordinary Discovery-era phaser rifle. And that's understandable because they did use the same model for this one as they did just the normal ones you can pick up through episode rewards. The primary attack on this weapon, however, has a unique firing mode that makes it exceptionally more powerful than your average ground weapon. The way the bolt burst on this weapon works is that it increases the number of shots it fires for every time you use it. Instead of like a normal bolt burst that'll fire 3 times with each use, this one will fire a single bolt during its first use, then 2 bolts for its second, and then 3 bolts for its third, effectively doubling its damage on the second shot and tripling it on its third. It maxes out at 3 and then will cycle back to 1. Part of the reason this weapon is so powerful is because each bolt is actually scaled more to what you would see on a sniper rifle than you would on a full auto rifle. That actually wasn't always the case. When this weapon first released, the primary attack was still scaled to what you would see on a normal full auto rifle, except it only fired half the shots because you had to build up its firing rate. So when it was first released, this weapon actually really sucked. But when Age of Discovery launched, it got buffed to its current state, and it has been arguably the most powerful ground weapon in Star Trek Online ever since. Now let's move on to the Boolean Heavy Assault Cannon. While the previous weapons were all phaser weapons, this one is going to deal disruptor damage. Its primary attack is called Quick Beam. It deals a lot of disruptor damage in one hit and also has a chance to cause a knockback to one enemy. The beam itself fires quickly, but the recharge time on the attack is 1.5 seconds, which may not sound like a long time, but trust me, it is noticeably longer than most ground weapons. The secondary is called Focused Blast. It's a cylindrical attack, kind of like the secondary on the Shax cannon. It deals less damage than the primary attack, but can affect up to 5 foes, has a guaranteed knockback, and has a chance to reduce damage resistance. With a longer recharge time on the primary attack and a weaker secondary attack, I do think that the Shax cannon is superior to this weapon these days, but there are kit modules and I think some personal traits too that can help overcome that low firing rate on the primary attack. So you could get better performance out of this weapon, you just have to build more into that, whereas the Shax cannon is kind of ready to go out of the box. Okay, next one to look at is the Advanced Herald Anti-Proton Beam Projector. Now, back in the day, this thing was the king of ground DPS because of how ridiculously powerful its primary attack is. Its primary is called Herald Anti-Proton Cascading Beam. It fires a beam of anti-proton damage, and this works like a normal beam attack, so it'll deal 2 ticks of damage. But the thing that made this thing really powerful was that the beam attack chains to 2 additional targets. The chained attacks deal 33% less damage per chain. But even with that reduced damage, that chaining effect made this thing really great for clearing out mobs of enemies. And this was years before Baul weapons were a thing. It also has a really powerful proc, which is a 5% chance to give yourself a small bonus damage buff to energy weapons that will last up to 20 seconds and stack up to 3 times. The secondary attack is called Herald Anti-Proton Blast. The attack will target a single enemy and generate a decent-sized AoE blast, damaging and knocking back anything within its radius. Though with a primary attack as powerful as this thing, the secondary attack really doesn't matter all that much. There is one downside to this weapon, however, and that is that it cannot be re-engineered. So you're going to be stuck with the modifiers that you get. I feel like Cryptek's always been kind of afraid to make this weapon re-engineerable just because of how powerful it's always been in the past. But honestly, I don't think it would make that much of a difference considering how powerful this weapon already is. And honestly, these days it's hard to imagine anything else outperforming the Discovery Rifle. But even with this drawback, this is still an exceptionally powerful weapon with a very unique visual aesthetic. Not that you won't stand out with something like the Boolean or the Shax cannon either, but I always felt like this thing had a much different vibe compared to anything else in Star Trek Online. I mean, it is Iconian tech after all. Okay, there's one more weapon in this tab I want to put a spotlight on, and that's because if I don't do it, my buddy Q is going to yell at me, and that is the Type 2 Phaser Compression Pistol circa 2285, or better known as the Hand Phaser from Wrath of Khan. Now, while this weapon isn't going to be as powerful as the other ground weapons I've talked about so far, this is still a pretty nice choice. The primary is a beam attack with some unique abilities. It has a 10% chance to fire a compression burst, which will deal a high amount of phaser damage, grant a plus 10 to repel, plus 2 to stun, debuff enemy run speed, and buff your own damage resistance. It also has a 5% chance to debuff your enemy's damage resistance. The secondary is called Compression Beam Setting, which is just a more powerful phaser attack but has all the same special abilities as the primary attack. One fun thing about this weapon is that it has a unique animation when it scores a kill with a critical hit. Most weapons will trigger a vaporizing animation when they score a kill with a critical hit, but the vaporizing animation on this weapon is reminiscent of the one used in Wrath of Khan. So that goes back to what I was saying earlier about if you just want to shop for Space Barbie in this store, that's fine. Because while you really can't call all of these weapons the best of the best, they are still more than capable of getting you through all of the ground content in the game. Though, side note about the Wrath of Khan pistol, you can also get that in the new Genesis bundle, and if you get through that bundle, it's an account unlock, so it might be more worth it to get it through there, because then you can reclaim it over and over, and equip your full away team. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about before moving on is the Gambling Device, which this one can be found in the Devices tab. It works just like a Tribble does. So much so that the buff from this thing and the buff from a Tribble will not stack together. But this thing has the best buff out of any Tribble. But this one works a little differently than a Tribble too, because it is a gambling device. So you have a 50-50 chance of winning or losing. If you win, you'll get plus 10% to crit chance and crit severity, and plus 15 to dodge for an hour. But if you lose, those values will be applied as a debuff instead. Fortunately, the debuff will only last for 1 minute, and the cooldown on the device itself is actually 30 seconds, so you'll be able to retry it before that debuff is even done. But yeah, 10% to crit chance and severity, that is quite the buff. It's also worth noting that the gambling device doesn't bind until you've actually opened up the box it comes in. So unlike the items in the ground gear tab, this thing can actually be sold on the exchange. So you might want to look there first before spending your Lobi. Now, those are some of the items I would definitely recommend if you're looking to buy a ground weapon out of the Lobi store. And while I did also say that you can pick up pretty much anything out of this tab of the Lobi store and be well off, there are still some weapons I would definitely avoid. The first one on this list is also the newest ground weapon to the Lobi store, the Magellan Staff. Its primary attack is a bolt setting that deals polaron damage and has a 5% chance to trigger a weapons malfunction in your enemies. The secondary is an energy blast that will deal an AoE around a select target. It sounds like it works kind of like the secondary on the Herald Beam Projector. And it's a staff weapon, so it will have the unique Staff Strike melee mechanic. You might be asking right now, what makes this weapon so bad? It actually sounds kind of cool, and you're right, it actually does sound kind of cool. This weapon isn't bad because of its stats. It's bad because of its price. Most ground weapons available in the Lobi store are priced at 50 Lobi, but for some reason the Magellan Staff weapon is priced at 200 Lobi. Now, there are also other items in this tab priced at 200 Lobi, but most of them are kit modules, personal traits, armor or EV suits. It makes a bit more sense to increase the price of those because odds are you're only going to buy one of those for your character. Most of the armor pieces in here also come with costumes, so you're paying for the space Barbie there. And because once you have the costume, they'll also unlock for your bridge officers, so there's really no need to buy multiple versions of the armor. Bridge officers can't use kit modules, so you'll only need one of those. Bridge officers can technically use a personal trait, but you have to apply an upgrade token to them first, so odds are you're not going to bother with that. I don't think EV suits are worth 200 Lobi, but that's a different rant altogether. There's also the mandatory treatment rifle, which that's another thing I'll be getting to in a bit, but the big thing there is that this is a very unique weapon that has very unique mechanics that you're not going to see anywhere else. That's why it's priced at 200 Lobi, because it's special. So the Magellan Staff weapon must have something special on it to warrant that 400% price increase compared to other ground weapons, right? But in fact, no, it doesn't. The bolt setting attack is like any other bolt setting attack you'd see on any common sniper rifle. The Energy Blast secondary attack is a little more unique. The only other weapon I can think of that has a secondary attack like that is the Herald Beam Projector, but that weapon's only 50 Lobi, and its primary attack is actually way more powerful than this thing. So neither the primary nor secondary attacks are anything special, but it is a staff weapon, that's pretty neat. But while staff weapons are uncommon, they are not unique. There are two more staff weapons available in the Lobi store, the Trill Guardian Staff and Jayla's Staff. They all have different firing modes, but all have the same Staff Strike melee mechanic. The only real difference between them is that the other two deal electrical damage while the Magellan Staff deals polaron damage. Which actually makes me think the other two are the more unique weapons because electrical damage is not a common damage type for ground weapons. Maybe that's what makes this weapon unique, a staff weapon that has a normal damage type? Except that's not unique either because there's another staff weapon that deals disruptor damage. The Nanopulse Staff Rifle, which is a free reward from the episode Partisans. So we're back to the question of, what the heck makes this thing worth a 400% price increase? The only other thing that makes this weapon stand out from the rest is that so far it's the only one in the Lobi store that is from Star Trek Strange New Worlds. And if this is Cryptic's line of thinking, that makes me very concerned that this is going to be their new standard pricing for ground weapons in the Lobi store. Do not buy the Magellan Staff weapon, because if you do, you are being ripped off. Speaking of rip-offs, let's move on to the next must-avoid item in this section, the Mandatory Medical Treatment Rifle. It's a heal rifle. It is a gun that is designed to heal your allies. The primary attack is called Mandatory Medical Treatment. It's a single target heal that'll have 2 ticks and can be influenced by crit chance and severity. It'll also have a small chance to restore some shields onto that target. The secondary is called Rapid Response Burst, and it's a larger AoE heal that can affect up to 5 friendlies. Neither of these attacks do any sort of damage to enemies. The only damage you're going to get out of this thing is from the tertiary melee attack, which is just rifle butt. I know there are people who are really into the idea of support and melee builds, but they just don't work that well in Star Trek Online unless you're at the elite level. And that's really just in space. There's really no such thing as a support ground build. And if there were, it would be more focused on buffing allied damage and debuffing enemy damage resistance, not healing allies. Ground combat is way too fast for this to be of any use in TFOs. Okay, so this thing might not be useful for TFOs, but what about one of my bridge officers? Couldn't I just put this on a healer bridge officer and just let them do their thing? You would think, but no, because while bridge officers can equip the rifle, they're actually not programmed to be able to target you or any allies with weapon attacks. So bridge officers can't even heal you with this thing, all they'll be able to do is use rifle butt. Fun fact, that isn't written anywhere in the item's description, which feels kinda scummy to me, because I know some people had to learn that the hard way. Or rather, the expensive way. So not only does it have no practical use in TFOs, but your bridge officers can't even use it. And after all that, they had the gall to charge 200 Lobi for this useless piece of crap. At least it's unique. Can't say that about the Magellan staff. The last must-avoid item I'll be going over is the personal ground trait Lower Decks Experience. It really pains me to talk about a trait literally named after Star Trek Lower Decks because I love that show so much, but this is genuinely a garbage personal trait. All this does is increase the damage of any bridge officers after they use an ensign-ranked bridge officer ability. It doesn't buff your character's damage, only your bridge officers. That means this personal trait has literally no value in TFOs because you can't take bridge officers with you into those. And even if you don't care about TFOs or other multiplayer content, even though this is an MMO, it's still a bad trait. You should be focused on buffing your own damage output, not your bridge officers. Your bridge officers really don't do that much. Giving them a small damage buff isn't going to change much. So it would be really foolish to use this personal trait, let alone spend 200 Lobi on it. Okay, I looked it up in the wiki, it's actually not a small buff, it's 200% bonus damage, but that's still not going to be a lot of damage because they're bridge officers. None of that damage buff is applied to you. Okay, before we wrap up, I'm going to go over a brief summary of the other 3 tabs available in the Lobi store. The Costumes tab is just that, Costumes. Pure Space Barbie, nothing else. If you right-click on them, you'll open up the description, which should give you a small preview image of what the costume will look like. Most of these can also be sold on the exchange, the only exception are these 2 that are at epic quality. Not only do they bind on pickup, but they are also more expensive than the other costumes. Don't ask me why, it's just because artificial scarcity has always got to be a thing for some reason. But yeah, everything in this section is just a costume, there's no right or wrong answer, it's just a matter of what you like. The same goes with the Vanity Pet section. Everything in here is a non-combat pet, so they will just follow you around until you end up in combat and then they'll disappear. Though these don't have a preview image, so maybe consult the wiki before buying. I should mention that some of the older pets are linked to certain accolades, so if you care about accolades at all, that might be something worth hunting for, but it just seems needlessly expensive and doesn't really have any payoff beyond bragging rights. But yeah, again, it's really just Space Barbie. And lastly, in the Devices tab, we already had a small look in here with the gambling device, and honestly, that's really the only thing worth anything in this tab. Everything else in here is just some worthless consumable device that is designed to eat away at your Lobi. The only thing in here that isn't a consumable besides the gambling device is Golden Knowledge. When you activate this device, it will recite one of the rules of acquisition. That's it. That's all it does. There's no stat buff or anything, all it does is just play some dialogue. And I was dumb enough to buy this years ago, back when it was new, so I can actually show you.
Rule 62. The riskier the road, the greater the profit. Rule 22. A wise man can hear profit in the wind. Rule 240. Time, like platinum, is a highly limited commodity.
Miser's Delight is technically the same thing. It'll play a rule of acquisition through some dialogue, but it's a consumable, so it only play the one and then it'll disappear. I genuinely don't know why any of these things exist. Beyond the gambling device, none of it is worth anything. Like, even when these things were new, they were not worth spending Lobi on. It genuinely baffles me. So yeah, that is the ground weapons section of the Lobi store, as well as a few other things in there. Let me know what your favorite Lobi store ground weapon is in the comments down below, or if you've never purchased one, let me know which one most interests you. And while you're down there, be sure to hit like and subscribe and hit that bell for notifications. If you'd like to further support the channel, you can hit the join button to become a member, or the super thanks button, or you can find the link to the merch store in the video's description. If you're ever shopping on the Epic Game Store, be sure to use my content creator code STU1701. But either way, thank you so much for watching. My name's Stu, and I will see you guys next time.